you listen to reason? Will you open your eyes? It's a wonder what you'll find with an open mind. You may be surprised. Yeah, gotta get away from this illusion for the sake of the world. This delusion, it's gotta
From Austin, Texas, I'm Matt Dillahunty. This is John Iacoletti. Woo!
Howdy.
Who did like half of the setup work. We're doing pretty well with limited crew today, even though we lost our backdrop for half a second or so. But you know, we don't mind being in the dark from time to time.
Not at all.
So I don't have any like special announcements other than the fact that if you go to the ACA website, the voters guide is up there as we approach election day. There's a voters guide that we sent out. We talked a little bit about it last week. There was somebody who asked me to talk about something else this week, but I've already forgotten because we had this party last night. There was a lot of drinking.
That's what I hear.
We're godless heathens. We have no reason to not engage in fun. Did you? I didn't even ask if you had something specific you wanted to talk about, or if we're just going to jump right into.
No, let's jump in. I've been out the last few weeks from the studio. I've been doing community theater, so it's good to be back. Usually I'm here even when I'm not on the camera setting up, but I was out for 3 weeks or so, and it's good to be back. So
well, I might have a project theater-wise to work with you on later, but before we get to the callers, as a reminder, after the show's over, we get together, the people involved in the show, and go to dinner at El Arroyo. They'll have the address up for you at the bottom of the screen. And also, even though we don't announce it, or haven't announced it in quite a while, the happy hour that was at the Dog and Duck for years. We found out the Dog and Duck is going to be closing. This Halloween, Friday, is going to be their last day at this location, although it may be the case that they end up at a new location on the east side in January. So this Thursday's happy hour, we're going to try and get as many people as we can to go back out there and have a good time at that venue. But I guess we'll go ahead and start taking calls. We've got the captain on line one. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good.
good. How are you?
I'm pretty good today. I've been thinking that it seems to me that people who are kind of real doctrinaire have trouble dealing with ambivalence and uncertainty.
Okay.
And that seems to me that seems to be something that I see a lot with religious folks and also with atheists and people who are real big on those kind of topics, whichever side of the thing they're on.
Can you give a little more detail about what exactly you mean? Because I mean, I realize that we're all uncomfortable with the idea of uncertainty, but realizing that
Sure.
we can't really be certain about anything, and that the universe we deal in kind of deals in probabilities. I think there's quite a few people who come to grips with this rather easily. I think I have.
So you were on the way to Holy Orders or the ministry or something? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, were you because you're such a good debater and everything now, were you like a really good apologist or what?
Nah, I was probably okay.
Well, it just seems that I see a lot of people who, when you find that they're, it's as if they need to go from one, you're kind of like jumping from one meaning structure or one belief system to another. It seems like that you're kind of missing out on. I think one of my biggest criticisms of religion is just the excess of need for clarification on things that are kind of, by their very nature, ambiguous. And atheism seems to be very similar too.
How?
Kind of like in the sense that there's people who are atheists, or the ones that I encounter, especially the ones that are really serious about it, like you guys. There's a need to settle the question, and to the extent that not only is it settled, but that you're almost in a constant mode of trying to settle it for everybody else.
I don't see that at all.
You know what you've been doing for the last few years? You watch your show?
Yeah, I know. Do you? I know exactly what I've been doing for the last 10
Oh,
years.
sure. I absolutely watch your show.
I mean, because it says here that your claim is that atheists are dogmatic.
Yeah, no, not necessarily dogmatic, but have a need to have things clearly delineated. Have a problem with dealing with, I would say, are below average in their ability to deal with ambiguity.
Well, I would fully accept that until you actually get specific and make a claim that I can address, that it's rather frustrating to deal with your ambiguity. I mean, what's your point?
My point, weren't you also in the military?
Yes.
That seems to be kind of like, it seems like almost everything you've been involved in is something where...
John, were you in the military?
I was never in the military.
There you go.
And
You want
that's
to talk to John?
Well, that's not my experience.
No, I was talking to you. Aren't you the primary host?
We're both here. You're talking about atheists in general, and you wanted to
No,
bring
I'm
up
not
my,
saying-
you
but I'm
wanted
not claiming
you brought
that
up
every
you
atheist
brought
is
up
in the
my
military.
you brought up my military experience as if it
Yes.
was particularly relevant.
I do think it's relevant.
Okay, and in what way?
I think that you're somebody who probably needs things so clearly set out that you kind of need them spoon-fed to you.
Okay.
I mean, you weren't. I mean, so you weren't exactly precocious as a skeptic, isn't that right?
I'm sorry?
As a skeptic, you were not exactly precocious, considering how late you were buying into all the superstition and stuff.
With the exception of my religion, I had already pretty much used skepticism to address every other supernatural claim.
So you already addressed all the supernatural claims, except for that there was a man in the sky who created our planet, and that Moses divided those. Well, so you hadn't really dealt with any. Were you saying you didn't believe in flying saucers, or what?
Correct?
Correct.
Yes, I had skeptically evaluated all sorts of things. It's just that the religious beliefs that I had were the last thing that I really took a look at. Because there are protective mechanisms built into religion. There is this encouragement to not question and a tradition of making it seem absurd that you should question it because everybody around you believes this and it's just so obvious and you seem to get answers and there's confirmation bias and 1,000 other things that religions depend on. But when I did decide to examine my religious beliefs appropriately, they went away.
So when did you decide to examine the thing which was the kind of the primary thing going on in your life? When did you decide to look at it?
When I decided to get serious about it?
Okay, well, so I thought you were considering the ministry, right?
Yes.
Well, you know, I was raised religious too. On both sides of my family, people pretty serious about religion, and you know, I was never really against it, and you know, I didn't feel like I was sacrilegious or anything. But I mean, we never, me and my friends and my cousins and brothers, we never really took it that seriously as far as like, I mean, Adam and Eve and that kind of thing.
Yep.
I
Well,
mean, I
other
think it
people
shows,
do.
So you really believe that stuff?
Yes.
Well, aren't you worried that whatever failings were hurting you back then you might somehow be suffering from the same problem?
No.
Well, I think you ought to consider that, because it seems like you just found yourself another kind of situation similar to what the one you had before was.
No, because I used to believe something and now I don't. And saying that not believing it is the same situation as believing it is patently absurd.
Oh, no, it's different in that way, but it's similar in the sense that that amount of time and energy that you've invested in
The amount of time and energy that I've invested, the amount of time and energy that I've invested in this is because I am convinced that a lot of other people are also wrong and I'd like to help them not be wrong. Or, if in fact they are right, I'd like them to be able to demonstrate that.
Isn't it less about that and more about your anger about having wasted so much of your time with this stuff?
No, I'm not angry at all.
You're not angry that you put all that time and energy into a bunch of BS?
No, because if I hadn't done that, I couldn't do what I do now.
Well, it seems like that you're missing out on the best thing about not being religious is that you don't have to put so much focus and intensity on unresolvable metaphysical questions.
Yeah, unfortunately, I actually give a damn about what kind of world I live in, and I care about people enough to help other people who may be believing things without good justification find their way free to enjoy life as well. I mean, you know pretty much nothing about me other than what you see on the show, so I don't know what it is that you think I'm missing out on, but I have about the best life I could imagine right now.
Well, I just don't think you're very laid back at all.
Okay. How well do you know me?
I don't know. I've watched hours and hours and hours of you talking.
Sure, you've
interacting
seen
with
the
people.
TV show.
Yes.
Do you know me in any other context?
No.
Okay. Have you got some point that you wanted to get to? Because I mean, while I am fairly laid back, I don't want to waste the entire show on your unsupported speculations about my life, because that's not really relevant to the show.
Oh, so people aren't getting a very good idea of what you're like from watching the show.
Well, they get a good idea of what I think about these issues with regard to religion and philosophy, skepticism, science, and things like that. But
Well, don't they
this is
also
not
get an idea of kind of what your emotional tone is?
On these topics in these scenarios.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's what I'm referring to.
Okay. So you have some opinion of me. Why should I give a damn?
Well, it's not just an opinion of you. It's an opinion of, I think, a lot of times what you find, I think that an unfortunate thing with people who get heavy into the atheism thing is that they're coming out of religion and they never get a chance to give the whole thing, just give it a rest.
Let me ask you this.
Sure.
Are you religious in any way?
Yes.
Okay. You don't seem to take it seriously, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I was raised by really, on my dad's side, by really liberal Catholics who, you know, religion was a big thing, but it was kind of like, it all came down to kind of like liberal, helping the poor kind of stuff.
Well, okay, but you believe there's a God, right?
I think there probably is, sure.
Okay, and you don't think that's an important issue worth investigating?
No, I don't at all. It seems to have very little to do with anything.
Thanks for calling. All right. I guess I shouldn't have hung up until maybe you had something to add, but I mean, if somebody's going to call the show to tell us how they don't think that the conversations that we're having are particularly important, and they're a believer, why the hell did you waste our time?
Well, and it's really presumptuous too. His initial claim that that the atheists he's met are really dogmatic. Well, I'm not. I'm not coming out of religion either, so I'm not rebelling against some notion that I wasted my time for all these years. And so, I think that's really a caricature. Maybe the people he's run into are like that, but he's painting with a pretty wide brush.
Yeah, I find it funny. I mean, the reason I'm an atheist is because I actually took religion seriously. I thought it was important enough to investigate. After all, what bigger question could there be than the possibility of an afterlife and where you might spend it and how you go about it and all this stuff? Or if there is some God who's judging your actions that you take, wouldn't you want to know which one's the right one, which actions are the right actions? And the people who have these fuzzy, I just don't give a damn beliefs, I don't get it. But the thing is, of the two of us, I am talking about issues that I think are important, where I think there's a lot of people who are misled. I'm willing to have my mind changed based on good evidence. I care about the topics. I do this quite often. I spend a good chunk of my life working on this. And yet he is in the position where he doesn't think this is particularly important, and yet it's important enough for him to call to tell us how not important it is.
And watch hours of the show.
Yeah, he watched hours of the show to determine that I'm not at all laid back and that I'm missing out on good things in life and that I'm wasting my time talking about something that he doesn't think is important. And yet he's a believer and I'm not. Well, congratulations. I don't see what the purpose of the call was. But.
Well, in my experiences is that the atheists, at least the ones that I've met, are much more comfortable with the idea of I don't know than believers are. So again, he started with the premise that atheists want an answer, want a solid answer, and they're just as dogmatic. And I don't see that at all. I think Atheists are much more willing to say, well, there's some things that we don't know. We're investigating all the time. We have the best explanation we have for how life formed on this planet, for example, but we're comfortable with saying, I don't know all the details yet, and it's believers who say, I do know, and it's God. So
yeah,
I don't see that at all.
To the extent that we are all a little disturbed by answers like I don't know and want to find the answers, the big difference between believers and non-believers is that believers think they found an answer and the non-believers don't agree. But.
Right.
Tim in Lansing, thanks for waiting. You're on the air.
Well, thank you for having me.
Hey, Tim.
I've been debating this guy on an app, and he asked me to call your radio show. They asked me on the radio show what I stood for. I said I believe the Bible is the inspired Word of God, and that it is infallible.
Okay.
I don't know you from Adam, and I have no opinion about anything that you say, but I do believe the Bible, and so I'm calling here because he asked me to call.
Okay, so why do you believe the Bible is? You're saying that the Bible is infallible, and I don't think we need to waste time figuring out like if you've got a preferred translation or anything. But I'm just wondering, why do you believe the Bible?
Well, because I've studied it from cover to cover. Unlike your last caller, which I couldn't even follow where he was going.
Yeah, no, you and I I was a better Christian than him when I was a Christian, and I probably still am because I spend a lot more time studying this than he'll ever do. But
right.
You say you believe it because you studied it, and there are plenty of other people, including myself, who've studied it, who don't agree with you. And so I need when I say why do you believe it, I'm looking for a bit more than just you've studied it.
Okay. I'm going to take you through a scenario. I'm going to ask you some questions. Just if you don't know the answer, that's fair, because I don't know all the answers. You can ask me questions. You can probably bring up things that would puzzle me. That's fair.
Okay.
But I would go home and I would study and call you back and try to figure out the answer. So I'm not coming here as an all-knowing person. I'm not trying to trap you into anything.
I got you.
But I'm giving you some evidence, okay?
Okay.
I'm going to ask you the first question is, when was crucifixion invented?
I have no idea.
Okay, it was invented at 150 BC. All right? I'm going somewhere with this.
Okay.
Okay. Psalms 22 is quoted by our Lord when he was being crucified. Jesus said, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why hast thou forsaken me, right? Yeah. All right, now, if I was hanging on the cross and I looked at you and said, oh Lord, my God, how great thou art, what would you think? You're familiar with How Great Thou Art, right? The song?
Yeah.
Okay. The Psalms was the Jewish hymn book.
Yes.
All right. And in Psalms 22, Jesus wasn't asking the questions. Jesus was referring them to a psalm. Now I want to read verse 1, and then I'm going to drop down to verse 16. Not because I'm trying to take and pick this thing apart, but I know that you have a short time. I'm trying to respect you.
Okay.
It says, my God, why has you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? Okay, so we know that Jesus is referring to this psalm.
Yep.
Verse 16, it says, dogs have surrounded me. The congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. Okay, let's just stop there. Piercing hands and feet. Before crucifixion, the Medes and the Persians and all those, they would impale people upon stakes, much like Caesar impaled Christians upon stakes in the first century. But the Romans loved to take criminals and really torture them. So here is a prophecy that prophesied an event of crucifixion some 850 years before it happened. And I'm talking about before crucifixion was invented, and it was 1,030 years before it happened. When I look at things like this, I base my faith upon it.
So when you look at what appears in Psalms and then what is written later in the New Testament with what supposedly happened to Jesus, you think the most reasonable conclusion is that one is a prophecy, the other is the fulfillment, and that everything else surrounding this is true also?
Yes, and I also will take historians such as Irenaeus, Origen, Justin Martyr, Marcion. I'm sure that you're very familiar with these things.
Yes, and all of them are after Jesus supposedly lived, so the only thing that they're reporting is hearsay accounts. But
Okay, except for Cornelius Tacitus
no,
and Studius.
no,
Cornelius Tacitus lived 52 to 50.
yeah, which is how many years after? So they were not there to
Well,
they're not eyewitnesses. These historians that you're referencing are not eyewitnesses. There are no contemporary historian accounts of anything.
Well, that's not exactly true.
It is exactly true.
When he wrote his writing, what I'm talking about is he wrote his writing at 52 to 54.
It is true,
if
but
he was-
Tim, let me ask it. I'd asked a question that you looked at Psalms and you looked at what happened to Jesus, and you see one is a fulfillment of the other, and then you think the most reasonable conclusion is that all the rest of the stuff surrounding this must be true, that this is the only reasonable explanation for all of it, right?
Well, that's part of it, but there's other things that will be added to it.
Well, I mean, you started by saying that you believe the Bible and you believe it's infallible.
That's
Now,
right. I do
the
believe
Bible-
everything around it is true. That's definitely true.
The Bible is 66 books by a bunch of different authors. We don't know who the authors were in most cases. I mean,
That's not true.
the Gospels
That
are.
is not true.
What's that?
That's not true.
It
we
is
do
true.
know the author of the Bible.
Who wrote the Gospels?
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Okay, I'm sorry, but you
And
simply do not understand anything about Bible authorship if you want to claim that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the Gospels, because the Gospels are anonymous. Those are the names that the church fathers put on them. We have no idea who the authors of the Gospels
How
are.
do you come to that conclusion?
I'm sorry?
How do you come to that conclusion?
From the bulk of New Testament scholars, both Christian and non-Christian.
Okay, so
It's if you do you happen to have an NIV, for example?
I don't hold much stock in the NIV. I usually
okay.
go back to the Greek and the Hebrew.
Okay, well, I mean, if you look in an NIV at the opening page just before Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it actually says that we don't know who the Gospels are. And if you go out to, Wikipedia or earlychristianwritings.com or any New Testament scholar, they all acknowledge that we have no idea who those authors are. So if you're going to assert that you know who the authors are, you are in fact unsupported in your position. But it doesn't.
You're unsupported because you're taking somebody that has written or perverted the Bible, and that's what a new NIV is, the perversion of the New Testament.
I'm not just referring to the NIV. I just asked if you happen to have one handy because I know it's written on the entry pages there. I'm fine with any version. It's not the versions that are relevant when historians just talk about who authored this. But whether or not you're correct or I'm correct about who the authors were doesn't tell us anything at all about whether or not it's true. Okay? And you're saying that you believe the Bible is true and that it's infallible. So do you think it's infallible with regard to moral instruction?
Yes.
Is slavery moral or immoral?
Bible never did back up slavery.
No, you're absolutely wrong. Tim. No, Tim, you hold it. It's my freaking show. I'm asking you.
I'm not going to let you pronounce the Word of God.
How about I read you the Word of God? Would you like that better?
That would be better.
Thank you. So you're saying that the Bible does not, in fact, endorse slavery, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
It didn't command slavery.
So let me open up to Exodus 21.
All right.
If you buy a Hebrew servant, he's to serve with you for 6 years, but in the 7th year, he should go free without paying anything. If he comes alone, he's to go free alone, but if he has a wife and she comes with him, then she is to go with him. And if a master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free. Now, if a man, going down to verse, but if a servant declares, I love my master, my wife, and children, and do not want to go free, then the master must take him before the judges. He shall take him to the door of the doorpost and pierce his ear with an awl, and he will be his servant for life. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as male servants do. If she does not please the master who has selected for her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for her sons, then he must grant her the rights of a daughter. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. If you continue on down later on in there, if an owner who hits a male or female slave in the eye and destroys it must let the slave go free for compensation for the eye. And an owner who knocks out the tooth of a male and female slave must let the slave go free to compensate for the tooth. If a bull gores a, well, I'm not going to go through the rest of that. So there in Exodus 21 is the instructions for slavery. And it specifically has differences between Hebrew slaves and non-Hebrew slaves. The non-Hebrew slaves, which you are to buy from the heathens who surround you, are your property that you can pass on to your children. This is an explicit instruction that you can own people as property and that you can beat them as long as they don't die within a day or two. Sorry?
Okay. Now, what he's doing, he's taking a people that were involved in, the Egyptian bondage, who were familiar with these. They had slaves and bondservants that they brought out. Even Abraham had bondservants and so forth, and slaves that came with him, that would fight for him. It's not like the slaves of the 1800s, where the
It does. No, Tim. It doesn't. You don't. I don't care about the slaves of the 1800s. The Bible sanctions owning people as property. They are your slaves.
That covenant, yes. And even in the New Testament, when a slave ran away and Paul tells him to go back to his master and serve his master, he does tell him to go back.
So let me.
We are to obey our masters. It does tell you that, but there's reasons for that.
So Tim, you're saying that slavery is then moral, which you just said it was immoral.
I didn't say that slavery. I said the Bible didn't tell you to buy slaves.
Actually, it not only tells you exactly who to buy them from.
It does not tell you to buy slaves.
Tim, okay, so let me, Tim, what you're saying is because the Bible doesn't say go therefore and buy slaves, but instead it says buy slaves from the heathen that surround you, that it's not instructing you to have slaves, correct?
Well, they says in verse 2, if you buy a slave. Verse 3,
yes, if you buy slaves. If you buy slaves. Tim, you said that Tim, you said that slavery was immoral, correct? Is it
slavery was immoral? It can be immoral. It don't necessarily have to be immoral.
It's not immoral to own people as property?
Not necessarily, no.
Oh, then I have nothing further to discuss with you, because if you're going to bend over backwards to make it appear that your book is moral when it's clearly not. I mean, if somebody enslaved you, Tim, if somebody enslaved you, is that moral or not?
Not necessarily, it can be.
Not necessarily. So under what conditions, Tim, under what conditions would you be okay with me enslaving you?
Well, when I go to work, I'm a slave of my owner.
No, you're not.
Yes, I sure am.
You don't have an owner, Tim. I'm asking you under what conditions would you be okay with me enslaving you, with you becoming my property?
I would not be willfully enslaved by you at all.
Yeah, most slaves, by the way, aren't willfully enslaved. But you're saying that there's a condition under which it would be moral for me to own you as property, and I want to know what that is.
It is this condition right here.
What condition?
In Exodus 21. If in that time, you see, that law does not apply to us today.
It doesn't matter whether it applies to us today, Tim. My question is about slavery. Is it moral to own people or not?
It's okay in God's eyes, so it's okay in my eyes.
Goodbye. That's all we needed to hear. You believe the Bible, you find it true. Slavery's okay in God's eyes. Thank you for acknowledging it. So it's okay in your eyes. And I am now more moral than you and your God, and so is everybody else on the planet. I don't understand. I mean, I understand how people kind of twist themselves in knots to defend their book. But when you ask a simple question about whether or not, under what conditions would it be okay for me to enslave you, Just watching the little tap dance there is, it's frustrating.
It's pretty hard to justify infallibility and perfect moralness to the Bible, so you have to do that tap dance if you're going to try to maintain that.
I mean, it's nice of Tim to say that clearly slavery is okay in God's eyes, so it's okay in his eyes. Well, it's not okay in my eyes. It's not okay in the eyes of the law. It's not okay in the eyes of anyone who has been enlightened. And it certainly wasn't okay in the eyes of pretty much anybody who's ever been a slave. If you wanted to know why slavery was wrong, that's all you had to do was ask the people who were enslaved. And your book not only sanctions them, but it also has instructions about when they took over towns and demolished and killed everybody and then kept all the young virgins for themselves. And in addition to that perfectly moral instruction, there is the condition where a woman who's raped is then forced to marry her rapist. I think that you need to stop getting your morals from an antiquated book that didn't understand the truth about human interactions, and instead engage a little empathy and recognize that when you see something in your holy book that conflicts with what you understand to be real, that you shouldn't tie yourself in knots to explain it away, or worse, accept that the immoral is moral. I would have been much happier if Tim had said, well, the Bible's pretty good. You get some stuff right and some stuff wrong. Hey, this kind of looks like prophecy to me, so I think maybe there might have been something to that. All that would have been fine. But when you start talking about infallibility, when you start saying there aren't contradictions, when you start saying that it is the best and most perfect moral guide, and that if God says that slavery is okay, then slavery is okay, you have now given up your humanity, and you are no longer worth talking to. And you need to recognize that before you can re-enter the conversation with the rest of civilized humanity. All right.
Well, and I didn't really buy that was a prophecy either. I didn't see crucifixion in Psalms anywhere. Yeah. Dogs encircle me. I'm not a Bible expert, but did that ever happen?
No, but that's metaphor. The dogs of the people were the dogs.
Okay. But yeah, if you're wanting it to be a prophecy, then I think you can stretch anything to fit something else. But
well, he had some dates wrong, like about. I wasn't going to bicker over whether it was 500 years or 800 years, and that doesn't matter. But when you start claiming that the New Testament Gospels were actually written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you are in no way a Bible scholar, and you haven't actually engaged in honest study of this, because there is no reputable New Testament scholar, Christian or otherwise, who will claim that the Gospels were written by the people whose names are on them. We know that those names were just traditional names applied by the church. And we have no idea who those people are. Anyway, moving on to Manny in Brooklyn. How you doing?
Hey, Matt, how are you?
Pretty good.
Fan of the show, and glad to be on. Just have a quick question. I was wondering, because I've been stumped by this in the past when I have conversations with theists, and when they say, well, okay, there are similarities between humans and other apes and monkeys because there's a common creator.
Okay.
So I was wondering, how can I respond to something like that? Because they stumped me and I kind of didn't know what to say.
You want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to something Tracy says a lot, is that before you attribute something to a creator, you should demonstrate that there's a creator first, before you start talking about what the creator might have done. That wouldn't be the most likely explanation for why there's similarity between humans and apes. That's an explanation, I guess, but I would ask them, why do you prefer that explanation? What's your evidence that they were created and that there's a creator?
The other thing about explanations is that they should be edifying. They should provide additional information or increase our understanding of something. And if you say that the reason there are similarities between humans and other apes is because they had a common creator, well, that's coming from someone who believes that humans and centipedes have a common creator.
Right.
So there's clearly not similarities there that are so obvious. And so you could say that the reason that humans and other apes have similarities is because there's a common creator. Or you could say the reason there are similarities between them is because they evolved through a common process and have a relatively more recent common ancestor than humans and centipedes. And which of those two actually serves as a better explanation? Because the God claim The God hypothesis has no explanatory power. It's an attempt to solve a mystery by appealing to a bigger mystery. If it's magic, if something can be used as an answer to anything, then it's an explanation for nothing, because it doesn't add any information that helps us understand why this is. It's just a bald assertion. Now you can't, when it says here, how can you refute that? You can't prove that it's wrong. That's the thing, is the God proposal isn't falsifiable. It's identical to them saying that the reason that humans and other apes have similar characteristics is because of magic. Well, you can't prove that wrong either. You also can't prove universe creating pixies wrong. These propositions that are unfalsifiable are ultimately empty.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Also, while I was on hold, I thought of something else.
Okay.
And that is, when, what's your explanation for, let's say, people who seem to be, I don't know, clairvoyant or psychic or whatever? Like, I knew someone who was having, their husband was leading like a completely other double life for like 20 years.
And that person went and spoke to a psychic and they revealed this information to them?
No, not a psychic, but someone approached her in, I don't know, a supermarket or what it was, and basically like knew her plight, knew what was going on, and sensed her sadness or whatever, and spoke to her about it when this woman didn't even know her. So I was wondering, like, I know that none of this proves a God or anything like that, but what's your opinion on that? People that, supposedly have a...
I don't have enough evidence from anecdotal accounts to tell you what happened or why in any specific situation. What I can say is that people who have claimed to be able to get messages from beyond have never successfully passed an appropriate test to demonstrate that they can do what they claim they do. Instead, what you see is a prevalence of TV psychics and mediums in heavily edited, spoon-fed, hot-reading environments. And you have anecdotal stories like the one you're talking about, where somebody came up to somebody and seemed to know something about him. Now, It may be the case that some people are better at reading people than others, that some people are much more tuned to their empathy of being able to see when somebody's sad. And there are a handful of reasons why people are obviously visibly sad in public. I mean, did you just lose somebody? Did you find out something was going on? Are you curious about, So the fact that on occasion somebody's going to get it right doesn't seem surprising to me. Matter of fact, what would be miraculous and surprising is if nobody ever guessed right. If nobody ever was able to predict something about another person. And that would be miraculous.
Right.
So the key is nothing. You shouldn't believe anything until there's sufficient evidence to warrant belief. And so when we hear about psychics and mediums and things like that, the position isn't, oh, these are all cons and frauds and liars. The position is these people haven't demonstrated that they can actually do what they claim to do under proper test conditions.
Right. All right. Well, again, thanks for listening and answering my questions. I won't take up too much of your time because I know you got other things. But again, John, Matt, you guys are awesome. Love the show. Keep on trucking.
All right. Thanks, Manny.
Thanks, Manny. Appreciate that.
And that actually kind of goes back to something that I had wanted to talk to Tim about until he started becoming an apologist for slavery. This idea about prophecy that he talked about, where there's this passage in Psalms and he sees what happened to Jesus as a fulfillment of that. Sometime in the near future, probably in the December timeframe, maybe January, as part of my Patreon project, I'm going to be doing something about prophecy. And I'm going to talk about, how we can go about determining that this is a prediction and it was fulfilled. In order for us to count that, it's something that needs to be fulfilled by a very specific event, a single event that is clearly and obviously what was predicted. Vague predictions, you just can't count. Oh, they pierced my hands. Okay. And even though if you found out if it met all the criteria, and you found that this passage in Psalms was reflected in the New Testament with what happened with Jesus, and you could demonstrate that there's a causal connection between the two, that this is the prophecy and this is clearly its fulfillment, what do you have then? You don't know why or how it was fulfilled. You don't know if it was because there was a God who predicted this, or if the author of the Psalms got lucky, or if someone was working to actively make that happen, or if there's somebody with a time machine who went back. You have no way to distinguish between all of those possible explanations for it. And so when you say that the fulfillment of prophecy is the basis for why you believe the Bible, what you're really saying is, I see connections, and I think the most plausible explanation for those connections is that there's a God who directed all this. How did you determine that that's the most plausible explanation instead of time machines and aliens and lucky guesses and people actively working to make things happen? You know, if I walk into a restaurant and make a prediction that I'm going to get a steak medium rare, and I get a medium rare steak, did the waiter fulfill prophecy? Or was this simply someone working to make a goal happen?
Yeah. Well, and if somebody wanted to make up a story about a Messiah who fulfilled prophecies, they're familiar with what the prophecies are. So they're going to tell a story that fulfills the prophecies that they want fulfilled.
Yep.
So there's lots of possibilities. You have to prove that the prophecy was actually made before the event that fulfilled it. You have to, there's a lot of things before you can say this is the fulfilled prophecy.
And within Christianity, it's even worse, because a lot of the so-called prophecies that Christians want to point to that Jesus supposedly fulfilled are not considered prophecies by Jews. I mean, this is their book, this is their Messiah,
and
they have certain prophecies that they have, you know, cataloged as these are the prophecies that apply to our Messiah if he should ever arrive. And of those, Jesus doesn't score particularly highly. He wasn't, you know, a warlord who ushered in a new era for Jerusalem. And yet they go through, and Matthew, the author of Matthew, who isn't Matthew, or we have no reason to conclude that it was in fact Matthew, but the author of that book is notoriously the worst of all the Gospels for going back and trying to grab anything he can find in the Jewish scriptures to say that Jesus fulfilled it. And he's so bad at it that he not only does he grab things that aren't prophecies, but he grabs things that clearly apply in a different context in order to develop a virgin birth and things like this. And none of that means that the Bible is false or wrong or that it's not prophecy. What it means is that you have no good foundation for claiming that it is. And that's, getting back to the first call, that's my position. My position is not to sit here and preach Jesus didn't exist and Christianity is a fiction. It's to say I used to believe this and I don't because I discovered I didn't have good reasons. And I'd like to know why other people think they have good reasons. And in Tim's case, the good reasons, or his reasons, whether they're good or not, have led him to the point where he's willing to accept whatever it says and proclaim it to be good, even if everything in his being should be screaming that this is not a good thing. All right. Whoops. There we go. Kyle in Ontario, how are you? Or Kylie.
Good.
Kylie.
Yeah, it's Kylie.
Hi, Kylie.
Sorry, I've got a little bit of a cold, so I'm a little bit hoarse. But yeah, I had a question about presuppositional apologetics.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've dealt with this a little bit with Psi.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, if, in your opinion, is it worth the time to
Nope.
actually engage with those people? No?
Nope. And that's,
Okay.
if you watch the Psi debate, and you don't even have to watch the whole thing, you can just like
No,
fast.
I watched it, yeah.
Yeah, my closing remarks at the end of that was basically an announcement of why I don't think it's worthwhile for anyone to ever engage with them at all, because they are not actually interested in debate. They are certainly not interested in an honest discussion about this. They are convinced that they have the truth, that they cannot possibly be wrong. And in Sai's case, you know, where he talks about how he won't engage in Bible studies with professed atheists.
Right.
Who the hell are you supposed to be engaging in Bible studies with?
Exactly.
I mean, how do you convert a professed atheist if your foundation is the Bible and yet you're not willing to discuss the Bible with them?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of I've had some experience with, I think you know who he is, Matt Slick. He's
Yeah.
He's
Yep.
over in our area. He's local to me, and I've actually met him in person. He's actually kind of a nice guy in
Oh,
person.
I thought he was in Colorado.
No, he's in Idaho. I'm right on the border of Idaho, so. But I mean, in person, he's actually a pretty nice guy. But he uses the whole tag argument on me, and at that point, I really didn't know what it was, and so I was like, But so now I've kind of gone and studied it, and I'm thinking, what is the point of engaging with somebody if this is what they're going to use to try? Because it's not really about a discussion; it's about winning, quote unquote, winning something.
If you can find some people, there are people who are presuppositionalists who have bought into that line of thought. And just quickly, presuppositionalists are people who presuppose the existence of God as an explanation for either the logical absolutes or the ability to reason in general and things like that. They are, in my opinion, violating Occam's razor by presupposing a new thing on top of the things that we would normally presuppose, like the primacy of existence and the reliability of reason. And if that confused you when I gave the summary, don't worry about it. It's not really worth the time. But there are those who, can be reached because, quite frankly, I'm not convinced there's a single person on the planet who has actually come to belief on the basis of tag or presuppositionalist arguments.
Yeah.
Instead, these are the arguments that they think should be convincing, which already demonstrates a hypocrisy on their part. They don't believe because of this. They use this argument because they believe.
Right.
And that is, that's worth exposing. And if you want to really be mean, you can ask Matt why his daughter's an atheist.
Yeah. Oh, well, actually, we did have kind of a little bit of a discussion about that, and he said that it was because she had been rebellious and stubborn and strong-willed all her life, and God gave her over to her rebelliousness.
God gave her over to reprobate mind. Okay, cool. Well, the thing is, I read her coming out blog post.
Yeah, I did read that.
And while it may be true that she was rebellious and stubborn,
that was the way God made her.
The other thing is, I didn't see that in her post. What I saw was someone actually arguing articulately and demonstrating that they had thought about this sincerely. This is not. This just doesn't seem to phase. Now, it doesn't matter. I was mostly joking because it's not like what somebody's kid doesn't have a bearing on the validity of their parents' argument. I kind of found it, kind of enlightening that the people who are engaged in what I consider to be dishonest apologetics, where they're not actually concerned or don't appear to be concerned with having a conversation that could lead to an understanding.
Right.
To have one of their own kids actually speak about why she doesn't believe was interesting to me.
Well, it was interesting. I went and met with him and had a conversation with him, and he was extremely different in person and when there wasn't somebody listening. So I think a lot of his bravado and all that is just, the entertainment value of having a show and all that. Because I didn't find him as disagreeable in person as he is when he talks and has debate. So
and see, that may be the case across the board because it's a lot different when you're engaged in a one-on-one conversation with somebody.
I definitely. One thing that I have learned a lot, because after having the conversation with him, I went back and did my research, and I understand the presuppositional position, at least at some point, and I had really no idea what Calvinism was either at that point. So now I kind of have an understanding of that, which is a whole other can of worms. But I actually was going to ask, just out of curiosity, when you were a Christian, were you a Calvinist or were you?
No.
No. Okay.
So the weird thing about Southern Baptists is that there's a little crossover there where there are some aspects of Calvinism where, but it's kind of muddied. And so while I certainly believed that there were God's chosen elect, the position was more along the lines of, you don't know who those people are, and they all have free will, and you are instructed in the Great Commission to go out and witness to people so that the Holy Spirit can work through you to lead the elect to God. Now, I think if you follow this through, and this is why I have a big problem with Calvinists is I think they have followed all of those things through to a purely logical conclusion. That if there is a God who has a plan, then God has chosen this particular universe in which I'm an atheist and somebody else is a believer, and where somebody else thinks that they're going to heaven when really only these people are. I mean, that's what you get from the God model that they're proposing. So it's not that Calvinists are wrong. It's just that when I sat down for lunch with a Calvinist who unfortunately died. He was the prank call that we got about Stone Church here in Austin actually put me in touch with a pastor, an associate pastor at Stone Church. And we went out to lunch a couple times before he headed off to do mission work. And one of the things that I asked him was, if there's no free will, and if God has predetermined everything, why are you going out to witness people?
Exactly, yeah.
And his answer was, because I don't have any other choice, which is true. If God predestined it, then that's what he's going to do. And I was very sad to hear that that he died. I really, part of me wanted, as soon as I heard about it, to reach out to his widow, who I'd never met, and let her know that, you know, there's a godless heathen in town that
that cares.
had great conversations with her husband and wishes that he'd come back safely. On the other hand, you know, somebody has died, and I don't want to go barging into their grieving process when they don't have a clue who I am.
Yeah.
So.
Well, after I've been studying Calvinism, it almost makes more sense to me in terms of if you're taking the Bible literally. So I can kind of appreciate where they're coming from in terms of they've followed a lot, like you said, a lot of the things through to the logical conclusion of what it would be if they really believed it. So on one hand, I can appreciate that they're trying to be logical, and it seems like a lot of the presuppositionalists are Calvinists too. It seems like
almost entirely.
Yeah, so it's just been like it, because I grew up in Armenian, I guess you call it, and tradition, and so this stuff was totally foreign to me and totally foreign to what I would even when I was a Christian, I would have thought there's no way that's how really God is. So, you know,
it was a little unusual when I first encountered it, and then I realized that it was based on the elements of things that I believed.
Yeah, and then you have to say, okay, if you can have two people that look at the Bible and have two totally different conclusions, how does this make any sense at all? You know, so yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I've repeatedly had to come to the defense of like Westboro Baptist Church, because while they're atrocious people, they're citing the Bible and they're reading it in its clearest literal sense. And the nicer Christians, who I'd much rather hang out with, who don't advocate for slavery and don't advocate for the killing of homosexuals or that they're deserving of death, they don't have a biblical foundation to actually stand on.
Right, it's kind of like the guy you were just talking to. You know, you have to give him some respect that he said, well, if God says it, I believe it. That's at least being consistent.
Yeah, I'm happy that I'm willing to acknowledge that Tim, for the most part, seems to be willing to go along with whatever the Bible actually says. It's just that what the Bible actually says is so horrible that nobody in their right mind should go along with it.
Would really do it.
And that's the thing.
Okay. Well, and then the last thing I was going to say, and maybe I don't know if you could even answer this question. I've been trying to find out in the view of Calvinism, because I know there's the concept of the age of accountability, which you're probably familiar with. And I was asking a couple of Calvinist people, so do they believe in that? Because it would seem to me that if someone's predestined, it wouldn't matter when they died, that they would go either heaven or hell. But I couldn't get a clear answer from anybody that was Calvinist, so I didn't know if you had any idea.
Yeah, you won't get any clear answer out of me either. I'm in complete agreement with you. Why on earth would you need an age of accountability if somebody's predestined?
Right.
You know, hey, before you were born, I chose whether or not you're going to go to heaven. So why do I need an age of accountability?
Because if it was an age of accountability, then you might as well just kill babies before they're born, because then they just go to heaven. Yeah,
if you're Calvinist and you accept that there's an age of accountability, then you do what somebody like Andrea Yates did, which is you kill your kids before they have the chance to lose paradise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Kylie. It's so strange to end a call with that makes sense.
Yeah.
No. All right, so we have a question from Antonio in Chile.
Hello, guys. Greeting from the south side of the world.
How's the weather?
It's hot, really hot.
Really hot.
Yeah, that's right. Well, first of all, I would like to apologize in advance because I had never studied English formally, so I'll say something wrong or grammatically incorrect.
So far, so good.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's it. The reason I'm calling is because I have two issues I would like to discuss. First is that it really bothers me that religious people always base their arguments on that the world cannot be created by itself, and that something cannot come from nothing. Therefore, it has to be a creator. But nobody, or at least very few people, seems to worry about why this omnipotent God needs to create humans. I mean, was he bored? Why a powerful being needs people to worship him? That's very selfish, in my opinion. Besides, if we are the image of God, which in first place makes no sense because God is not physical, then why are we so imperfect? I mean, why are we so weak? And why God puts us into an extremely dangerous world with tons of threats to our life? I mean, earthquakes, dangerous animals, high heels, water. And talking about water, why to put us into a world 75% made of water, but we are not able to live in it? And also, there are some other species able to live in the water. Is that meant to make us jealous? I don't know. What's the purpose?
Those are all great questions, and I'm going to let John give you the answers to all of them.
Thank you.
I totally agree with you. I think those are all good questions that don't really make much sense to me either. I don't have an answer for why people think that that's a rational and coherent view of things, but
I'm waiting for there to be a counterpart show to ours called the Apologist Experience. Because when questions like this come in, where we completely agree with you, Antonio, it doesn't make sense. And I don't know why more people don't question this. I've heard it before, if God is in fact perfect, then how could he create something that could not be perfect, that could possibly fail? But if also he's perfect, that means he's complete, which means he didn't need anybody else. What was the purpose in creating us? And if he needed to create us for some reason so that we can, praise him in an afterlife, then why not just create us all there? If he already knows who's going to get there, why not just skip over this period of time? Is there something about living on Earth for a few years that is the only way to create a proper denizen of heaven? And if so, then God doesn't sound particularly perfect anyway. If he has to use this horrible system of living a life in a flawed universe in order to get the denizens that he wants in heaven, none of it makes any sense. Why on earth, why couldn't he have been satisfied being alone as a Trinity even? I mean, surely. Yeah. But we have completely run out of time. They put the credits up on me. I apologize. Thanks so much for calling in. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us this week. We'll be back again next week. There's the people who make the show happen, and one of them is sitting here.
Hey.